Thank you all for coming. First order of business, I understand that the room is going to be cooled down. So in case anyone is too warm, we're going to be getting relief in a moment. Okay. A primary theme of this convention has been to give voice to the Orthodox women and to encourage our leadership in the community. Yesterday, we focused upon Torah and Tefillah, and today we're going to explore issues of leadership. I've been told that it's an historic moment that we now have women officers at a major Jewish organization, a major Orthodox Jewish organization, as is the OU, and for that I'm very pleased, and I know that my fellow vice president is very pleased and honored as well. So I'm going to be introducing our moderator, Dr. Marian Stoltz-Loike, who's a prime example of that kind of leadership, both in the OU and in the general community. She is one of the foremost leaders in education in the Jewish community. Dr. Stoltz-Loike is currently the Dean of Lander College for Women and is the Vice President of Online Education at Touro College. Through an honors program that she recently created approximately 4 years ago, she has enabled extremely talented young women to build skills and competencies so that they can go out into the global economy and the global marketplace and succeed. Marian has published 2 books and over 50 articles relating to the maturing workforce, diversity, cross-cultural management, and work-life issues. She's an honors graduate of Harvard University and was awarded her PhD in experimental psychology at NYU. Her husband is an NCSY alumnus and a faculty member at Columbia School of Physicians and Surgeons, and her children are, of course, members of OU shuls. So please welcome our moderator, our new vice president, Dr. Marian Stoltz-Loike.
Thanks, Bobby. I appreciate that, and we are, all of us, new vice presidents. We feel the burden and the excitement of that responsibility, and we hope we will serve all of you very well in that capacity. What I'd like to do, by way of introduction to this panel on women in leadership, and we're really talking about creating new opportunities and expanded opportunities for women in leadership positions, both at the OU, in your shuls, and in a variety of community organizations, is to really lay the groundwork for that and lay the platform on which we can have a discussion. This is going to be a two-part discussion. Part one is going to be with my incredible group of panelists. You are all lucky to be here, and anyone who's not here will have missed an amazing session. But in addition, we have part two, which is, we all know it's nice to think about things, but we also want to look at trying to affect change. So when we finish this panel at just a little bit before 12:15, I'd invite all of you and some of the other folks in the room next door to come downstairs and join with us to take strategy to practice and think about some of the things we can do, again, at the OU, in our hometowns, in our shuls, in our communities, to try to enable women to achieve more in terms of a leadership perspective. Now, I could start in terms of my remarks and setting this forward by talking about the models from Torah in terms of women's leadership, and there are many. Obviously, looking at the Sheva Neviot, the 4 Imahot, and obviously some of them overlap with the Sheva Neviot. But you look to women like Devorah HaNeviah and her magnificent Shira that was truly groundbreaking in terms of what she said and what she did. Looking at Devorah as a woman who was a leader unique to her time, where Devorah would sit under that date tree, and people would come to her, and she was a strategic leader, ultimately a military leader, but really a woman who was unique in her position. And obviously Sarah and Esther, who transformed their role and evolved and finally found their voices as leaders within the Jewish community to bring forth Jewish destiny and to guarantee a Jewish future. But today we also need more complex models that fit the technology and broader complexity of the 21st century. And what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about what women are doing and what they would like to do. One of the reasons why it's so important to focus on women is, as Alan Fagan said yesterday in his remarks, is number one, it's the smart thing to do. But it's the smart thing to do because otherwise we're using half of our talent pool. What I'm finding when I talk to engineering firms and technology firms like Google, they are all trying to recruit more women to their ranks. Why? Because you can't develop good products if your developers only represent half your population. And for us in our communities, we can't develop the products that advance the work we're doing, the work that the OU and the various other organizations you're involved in focus on and really get you excited about, without having a full complement of the people for whom you're designing programs and projects at the table in leadership positions. And in fact, if we look at what's going on and what women are doing, I see in my own experience at the Lander College for Women, my students want to succeed. They want to have full seats at the table. More than that, they expect to. They're either envisioning themselves as being parts of dual career couples or supporting someone for a number of years in the future who's going to sit and learn. And that's probably true wherever your children are enrolled in school. They're looking at similar futures. And in fact, the research, there's a famous study called Generations in Gender that was done by the Families and Work Institute that looked at women in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and found that both men and women in those age groups are expecting to work full-time, year-round, and share work responsibility and family responsibilities more or less equally. And it works better and differently in different families, but that is the expectations. So just to give you some examples, and again, I know my students best, but they are typical of students at other schools. So I can be speaking about students at Touro, but it's the same story at places like Stern or secular colleges when we think about what young Orthodox women are doing today. So number one, it's getting accepted, my students are getting accepted to all the top tier law schools and medical schools and expecting to work in those fields. And they're becoming accountants and going into digital multimedia and a variety of other things. We have a student who started a business called the Jewish Women's Entrepreneurial Network. And the idea is many women start businesses. Some of them are small businesses that people are running from their homes. And some of them are financial service companies that are much broader and more complex. But they all need support and mentoring, and that's why she started a network for that. I have a student who did research at NYU in the rheumatology department and changed the way lupus is being looked at, not only at NYU Medical School, but across the country. Another student is enrolled in a course in entrepreneurship and biotechnology. And then we have students who are planning to go into engineering. If you haven't heard, that's the big field for women. Biomedical, chemical, mechanical, and other fields, as well as computer science, because that's where the jobs are. It's an impressive list of what students are doing today and what they want to do. But our discussion is not just about students. It's involved with every woman in this room and every man in the room who's involved with a woman, as a spouse, perhaps as a mother, perhaps as a daughter. And the question of what we need to do to help them achieve what they want to be able to achieve. I don't think anyone in this room believes that women are less intelligent or less capable than men. But sometimes what people think is that if you provide an opportunity for women at a senior leadership position, it's going to conflict with their other responsibilities, with their focus, particularly in the frum world, on family, on home, on Jewish values. But in fact, what the data shows is that organizations that invest in women and give them the opportunities to get ahead and give them the ability to make the choice, in fact, have women who, number one, don't leave for family responsibilities, but are engaged contributors, and somehow, as you'll hear from our panelists, figure out a way to make it all work, to fulfill their responsibilities as professionals, to fulfill their responsibilities within the community and at home, and thrive in all of those various roles. One of the questions, and I had the privilege of sitting down with my panelists earlier, is we raised a couple of questions, which are, how do we invite people to the table? But when we're the women, how do we also make sure that we expect to have a seat at the table, that we invite ourselves at the table? We in the Orthodox Jewish community need to face the fact that sadly we've lagged behind many other professional and other parts even of the Jewish community in terms of promoting women to leadership leadership opportunities. Today, the OU and this weekend, with really electing women to senior leadership position, not only has shattered a glass ceiling that existed, but has made a clear statement to everyone who's here and far beyond that that's not acceptable to us any longer. And again, Alan, in his remarks last night, articulated that position very, very clearly. And I think putting us in that light is going to refresh the OU tremendously, bring more people to the table, and bring more men and women. It's not just about promoting women, it's about changing how people look at us as an organization. And as we have more women in leadership roles, it's a statement to everyone, and it's a gender-neutral statement that's positive for everyone who we would like to get involved in the OU. As an officer of the OU, I'm very excited about this opportunity, and I think that we need to take these messages of women in leadership home to transform what's going on in our communities, in our shuls, and also in the local activities that you engage in with the OU. The panel that I'm about to introduce is, as I said, the first part of our discussion, and I have to tell you, each of the women here is a trailblazer in her own field. As you listen to our speakers, I'd like to challenge you to think about what we can do to get more women involved in leadership roles, and then to keep those ideas so we can apply them in part two of our discussion when we go downstairs. Our three terrific speakers are here really to set the stage, but more than that, to inspire us. I sat with awe during our discussion, listening to what they've done, listening to how they've accomplished things, and believe me, had they been men, I would have been equally awe-inspired. I wasn't impressed because it was women who were achieving this, but because it was very successful, thoughtful people achieving something, finding gaps in the Orthodox community and stepping up and creating something. Again, each of our women here has a generative role. They impact our notion of what's possible for women to achieve by building new educational and communal structures to transform the lives of women with whom they work. And I'd like to welcome our three speakers, and I'll tell you their names and introduce them. Before each of them speaks, I'm going to tell you a bit about their background, but we have Dr. Rona Novick, we have Ms. Hani Newberger, and we have Rabbanit Henkin. And now it's my privilege to first introduce Dr. Rona Novick, who will be our first speaker, and we will have time for questions and answers at the end. Dr. Novick is the Dean of the Azrieli Graduate School of Jewish Education and Administration at Yeshiva University, and she holds the Rain and Stanley Silverstein Chair in Professional Ethics and Values. She holds an appointment as Associate Clinical Professor of Child Psychology at North Shore Long Island Jewish Medical Center. Dr. Novick also serves as co-educational director of the Hidden Sparks program, providing consultation to day schools and yeshivot. She's recognized for her expertise in behavior management and child behavior therapy, and has published scholarly articles on school applications of behavior management, children and trauma, and bully prevention in school. She's the author of a book for parents, Helping Your Child Make Friends, and editor of the book series Kids Don't Come with Instruction Manuals, and credits her expertise to both professional training and experience, and also being a mother and a mother-in-law. On a personal note, when we had the opportunity to speak, one of the things that Dr. Novick has done repeatedly is she's seen an opportunity. And I would like to just paraphrase the familiar phrase, Im lo achshav eimatai. What she said is, if I'm not willing to step up to this position, maybe other women will feel they can't either. So her role as a trailblazer has been to jump in when there's been an opportunity, so it makes it easier for other women to move ahead. And in fact, she's been able to do that for many, many women. Dr. Novick.
Okay, we can sit, right? You can hear me okay? Okay. First, I have to thank the OU for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to share this space with incredible women. And one of the things we remarked on is how important and nurturing it is for those of us who are women in these kinds of positions to meet other women, to share our thoughts and our ideas, and to share them with you. I started my career and spent more decades than I'm willing to admit in the secular world. Although every hospital but one that I worked for had Jewish in its name, they were secular institutions. And so I had my professional hat and I had my Jewish hat, and they did not mix or meld. But what was interesting in that context is that gender, in my field of child psychology, gender didn't play much of a role. What you did or didn't do in your career, what leadership positions were open to you or available, had much more to do with your skill set and your experience than it did with your gender. And I had a series of leadership opportunities in that field, and I had bosses who were male or who were female. I moved to Jewish education, and all of a sudden, things changed. For the first time in my life, I got to be one person I could unify my professional and my Jewishness in my career path, but I also had to confront realities about roles of women that before were not part of my career issues, questions, or decisions. And that has made for a very interesting experience for me. I think I bring a different perspective. I also think that at times some of my students, graduate students at the Azrieli School of Jewish Education who are training either to be Jewish educators or administrators and leaders in Jewish education, bring to me their experiences, which are exclusively located in the Jewish world. And I may have a very different perspective because of the years that I spent in the secular world. But what I've discovered is that one critical element, I believe, that any person needs to move into leadership is skills. We need to know what leadership means and how to do it. It's now the core of our curriculum in the doctoral program in Jewish education. But we were talking about amongst ourselves that is that too little too late? And should we not be including curricula on leadership very early on in our Jewish day schools? Certainly through my work in bully prevention, I work with middle school students on the concept of social responsibility, on our chiyuv, on our responsibility to be social agents of change. I don't think it's too early to start with young children and certainly with young women, empowering them with the skills that will make them comfortable as leaders. I also think it's very, very important that we expose children, young adults, and young professionals from very early on to the notion that there's more than one model of leadership. That leadership is not just CEO, leadership is not just the Rav, leadership is not just the Gabbai, that there are multiple ways to lead, there are multiple pathways to leadership, and that opens doors. Sometimes it is extraordinarily helpful and valuable for people to see, to have a vision of what that leadership looks like, and that's what was alluded to. When I was debating about accepting my most recent promotion, I sat with my husband and we were, doing our cheshbonos about what this would mean for me professionally, for us as a family. And I shared the fact that all through my professional career, I had always had a place in my office where young women would come and say, "You are the first." Dr. Novick, Rona, I never before met a frum person, female, doing what you do. You're my role model. And part of my decision in moving forward in my career was about being able to yet again sit in an office where young women would sit across from me and say, "You are the first." Luckily, I share the table with another dean, but it's not, that common that there are women in positions of leadership in higher education, and it's a wonderful opportunity to serve as that role model. The last thought I'm going to leave with is a somewhat provocative one, but I'm really thrilled that this room is not filled with only women. I'm really thrilled that we're almost equally populated by gentlemen, because I believe that part of what will make a difference in bringing women to the table has to do with men. Yes, women, we need to lean in. Yes, girls, we need to step forward, and we need to find our passions and our model of leadership and what works for us. But gentlemen, we also benefit from an invitation. It is also greatly, greatly helped when the path is open to us and that there aren't roadblocks. Years ago, when I first taught a course on family and education, I went around the table and I asked everyone to do their own kind of family history, their genogram, about concepts of education in their family. And I was shocked by two disparate answers that came from women around the table. It's a co-ed class, but it was striking, these two answers from women. One woman said, this is in a graduate doctoral program, "There was no question in my mind, no question in my family's mind, that I was going to go for advanced education. Didn't matter my gender, it was irrelevant. I come from an educated family. It was assumed that I would get master's, doctorate, medical degree. I would have an advanced degree." And within moments, another woman at the table said, "It was unthought of and unheard of, coming from my family and my background, that a woman would go to any kind of education. Never mind," and this is now a woman who leads an educational program, "never mind that I would become the recipient of an advanced degree and become a leader in my field." I want the world to be open to all of those women, and regardless of their background, for us to create a table in the Orthodox world where all of them see the possibility, see the potential, and we help them get there. Thank you.
Our next trailblazer is Mrs. Hani and Newberger. And what's interesting just in speaking to Mrs. Newberger is in all these pieces, as you think about the parts of her life, there's a very interesting tapestry. And you could look at her bio in your programs. If you think about her and what she's done, she works currently for the NSA, for the National Security Administration, and she's on the NSA's senior leadership team. You might have a stereotype of what she would be like. She's also highly involved in the community, and she founded an organization, and in fact, this Shabbos was not able to be here because they had a Shabbaton, and the organization is well known to many of you. It's called Sister to Sister. It helps women who have experienced divorce. There are 900 single mothers involved. 420 people attended their Shabbos event, and the purpose is to give practical advice and support. But Hani is also from Borough Park. And so Hani has been able to weave those various parts of her life into a tapestry that makes her unique. And the leadership that she brings to each of the roles that she plays are the result of her experience and her background. She does incredible things on a daily basis at work. She's able to achieve amazing things in her communal commitment, and also from the perspective of being a role model for all of us, older and younger, in the Frum community. She brings that to the table as well. And it's a real pleasure for me to introduce someone to you who's, if you don't know her, you should get to know her. She's someone who is really leading the charge for all of us, and she's going to focus more on, I guess, her communal responsibility and what she's been doing in terms of that. But it's no less impressive what she's doing at the NSA to make a statement as a woman, but even more than that, as a Frum woman, to people who are planning the future that affects each of us in this country. Mrs. Hani Newberger.
Good morning. So it is truly an honor to be here. It's truly an honor to be sitting among such other really esteemed panelists. I have to say, as a Frum woman, as we sat this morning and just talked a bit, I was struck by how rarely I sit with a group of other Frum female professionals. So that alone is a comment, I think, for each of us. Why that happens so rarely? Perhaps that we are all, thank God, busy and don't necessarily make the time, but it was truly a wonderful thing to have that opportunity. So it's wonderful to be here. It is, in fact, I think perhaps very appropriate, but also so interesting that we're having a conversation about Orthodox women's leadership. The Shabbos after the OU really led the charge in terms of bringing a slate and electing a slate of women to its leadership. So I think from all of us, our thanks and congratulations to that has occurred. Thought I would perhaps address the topic, since really looking Klal Yisrael today, particularly the Orthodox branch of Klal Yisrael, is a very broad area. And I thought I would approach it perhaps not so much from the traditional community that OU typically serves, but to a certain degree from the community I come from, the more traditional branch of the Orthodox community, where I think increasingly there are more and more women professionals, and to perhaps talk about that perspective. So first, I think each of us bring, our perspectives very much are shaped by our experiences. There's three sets of experiences that shape my perspectives on women's leadership. The first, very much, as I said, is my upbringing within the traditional branch, where I also saw some of the most, I'll use a Yiddish word, tichtig, or capable women I've ever met. Were those women who raised large families, ran community organizations, all just kind of got it done in a quiet, unassuming way that really inspires me very much each and every day to just not talk, get it done. So certainly that model of women's leadership. The second very much is within the national security community. My husband reminded me this morning of a story I'd experienced several years before when I worked in the Pentagon and I was staff, the Secretary of Defense, so I was sitting at a meeting as staff, and it was a discussion around sexual harassment in the military. And as was traditional, the Secretary of Defense was hosting a meeting with the senior civilians for each service, the service secretaries, so the Secretary of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, etc., as well as the senior military officials, so the Chief of Naval Operations, etc. And as I looked around the room, all were male. And they were having a very thoughtful, very heartfelt discussion around sexual harassment in the military. But clearly, we can each see why it wasn't a holistic or necessarily fully rich discussion. And as I sat there, as kind of taking notes, I was struck by how much more potentially effective the conversation and what their goals would have been had there been women at the table, simply to share perspectives. So that's certainly, and watching that over the years, I work for the National Security Agency, which what one might not expect is it's actually an organization that has become increasingly open to women. On the senior leadership team today, it's roughly about 40% women and across the organization. And I think what women often bring, there is the stereotypes of thinkers versus kind of bringing things across, bringing people together. I've certainly seen the role that women can play, bringing diverse perspectives together towards a common end goal. And then finally, the third perspective is the perspective I've seen from both founding and having the privilege of being among a network of women running Sister to Sister, which really focused on a social need within our community that hadn't necessarily been recognized, potentially because it mostly addressed women. From divorced women, mostly raising children alone, as breadwinners, pulling families together, raising a generation. And because in some cases, divorce has a unique impact on women. They're often left with custody of children, they're left to raise children, which they feel privileged to do. We saw how much a group of women focusing on what needed to be done and creating a table to address that. We have over 200 women volunteering to serve in some capacity. The network of strength, of both emotional, financial, spiritual strength, the network of empowerment that is created to address a social need, how much as a group of women we have been able to accomplish. So those three perspectives, the upbringing, the professional background, as well as the social, addressing a need within the frum community that is often directly impacts women and potentially did not necessarily get recognized as a result, but still how much women could accomplish doing that. So I think there's just two issues I wanted to raise and then just propose two perhaps practical suggestions for phase 2 that we could put on the table. And the first is that, and I think Dean Stoltz-Loike referred to it, practically speaking, I think there's a perspective that within the more traditional community, women's have significant roles in their homes, raising children, and that potentially that is even a primary role. I think as a result, that has not allowed for a conversation that's recognized the reality, which is that many women today are working, and they're not necessarily, from my perspective, being equipped in our educational system throughout high school and then afterwards for some of the opportunities and some of the challenges they will face in those roles. It's not always easy being a frum working woman in the workplace. It's not always easy being a woman in the workplace, being a leader in the workplace. How much more so, it's not always easy being a frum working woman or leader in the workplace. First, because sometimes the traditional models we grow up with of a woman's role in leadership, and then potentially of how to just manage being a frum person. I recall the first time I had a conversation about Sukkot. Rosh Hashanah had come and go, and I got very understanding nods about taking off. Yom Kippur, certainly everybody understood. And then with my luck, it was a new job, and of course, the holiday fell during the weekdays. And when I was taking the time off, I got this look of, what is this holiday? And how many more follow it? And the opportunity to, in my 12th grade education, in my seminary education, nobody had prepared me for that conversation. And I am confident that many men and many women before me had had that conversation and had best practices to share about how to handle it. So let's prepare our women for that conversation. Similarly, let's prepare them for sometimes the challenges they will face as mothers who take their roles as mothers seriously when the child's play is always in the middle of the day because the school hasn't necessarily recognized that 60 or 70% of the mothers in their parent body are working women. How do we start that conversation to say, we all want to be at the school play. Can you make it at 9 a.m.? can you make it at 4:30 p.m.? Because we work an hour away and we can't come to the school play, or we're coming with a heavy heart knowing that we've just taken 4 hours off of work. So how to start that conversation in a way that is not a complaint, but in a way that says we love our roles as wives, mothers, and professionals, and as a community to achieve those roles with success. We want to have the conversation about how we do that balance. And then the second piece is, over the last 2 decades, I think there's been a beautiful increased role for Touro, increased involvement by men and women, we'll talk about men for a moment, in shul life, whether it's attending minyan more frequently, whether it's daf yomi that's now shul-based, but men are spending more time in shul. I recall a Rav of a shul who talked about how his father, who was also a Rav, answered some halachic shelos, gave a drasha a few times a year, but how he instead is doing pastoral counseling, is talking with families every day. It's a whole different role. Similarly, women's, from my perspective, spiritual and emotional needs have evolved. And I think that the society's understanding of how it serves those spiritual and emotional needs has not necessarily progressed with it. So I had the privilege of meeting Rabbanit Henkin this morning, and the role she's played in building the Yoatzot Halacha program I think is revolutionary, and I felt honored to really meet the person who had led that and pioneered that. I think in some branches of our communities, the concept of that concept is potentially a decade away. So how do we meet the social and emotional needs of women across the full spectrum of Orthodoxy? How do we provide women the training? I see within Sister to Sister, the set of needs we see across the almost 1,000 women we serve spans such a spectrum. And in many cases, women need other women to talk about some of those challenges because they're more comfortable discussing some of those needs with women. We're not necessarily training or equipping female leaders in our community to address those needs. In some cases, they're emotional and spiritual. In some cases, they're halachic needs. In cases, the Yoatzot Halacha address that. In other communities, it may be just equipping a woman to serve as a translator to the Rav for what those questions and those needs are. So how do we do that so that women across the full spread of Orthodoxy have the support they need to address that? So I'll close my remarks with just kind of recapping just the potentially 2 practical suggestions. The first would be that we begin equipping our both girls in 12th grade and post-high school education programs to actively be female frum professionals. Having women who are female frum professionals, spend time with them, offer time as mentors, offer time as practical guides to some of the challenges, bringing in some of those best practices to deal with that. And then the second piece to think about how we train and equip women leaders to serve the emotional and spiritual need of women in the community in the broadest leadership way. So thank you. It was wonderful to be here.
And now it's my privilege to introduce our third trailblazer, Rabbanit Chana Henkin. Many of you have heard from Rabbanit Henkin. She was a guest with all of us during this Shabbat at the OU convention. So you've heard, we know about the Yoatzot Halacha, and it is unbelievable. As Ms. Newberger said, it's truly impressive what she's been able to accomplish. You can read her bio and get more information, but what I'd like to do is speak a little bit about the power of a dream and what you can accomplish because of that. Rabbanit Henkin goes back a little more than 25 years ago, and she saw a gap in terms of what was going on in the Jewish community. She looked at her own Jewish education. She looked at the school she wished she could have been able to attend and realized it didn't exist. And so what she decided to do was create that school so that women like her would have a place to go to in the future. And that was the genesis of Nishmat, which she founded and has been the dean of the Rosh Midrashah for the last 25 years. Nishmat is a place where women can come together and learn. There are women who are just barely out of high school. There are women in their 50s, most women are in their 20s, and may stay 4, 5, or 6 years because they want to be able to learn at the same level as men, but in a place where they feel is halachically comfortable among women. And so they come and they learn and they grow and they develop. And I think we all owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Rabbanit Henkin, not just for creating the Yoatzot Halacha program, which we all know affects us. And as she mentioned, there are going to be, and she probably mentioned over Shabbat, she mentioned to us this morning, at the end of this year, there will be over 100 women who have gone through the program. And we owe her a tremendous debt of gratitude, because many women aren't comfortable asking men a variety of questions. And she not only has changed who we go to ask questions, but she's changed the dialogue about how we think about those issues. And I think that's tremendously important. But in addition, in terms of Nishmat, what she's been able to accomplish is to enable women to dream, to enable each and every one of us to see what can be accomplished when we think the impossible and say, more or less, big deal, I'm going to do it anyway. And now it's my true pleasure to introduce Rabbanit Henkin.
Thank you very much. I hope that you're able to hear me. I apologize for my hoarseness. Yeah, I think it's amplifying. Okay. Okay. I just would like to rephrase something that was said in that very beautiful introduction, which is, for me, it's never been about being able to learn what the men are learning. It's being able to learn at the highest possible level. It's not about keeping up. And in the same way, I think what we're speaking about, I don't see it as a women's issue. I see it as an issue for the Jewish community, which has to do with enabling every member of the Jewish community to realize themselves in the fullest way and to contribute to leadership in the fullest way. I want to start with a Gemara in Chagiga, beginning of Chagiga, Daf Gimel. There are two stories back to back, which are mirror images of each other. They both occur, I presume, on Chol HaMoed. There's mitzvah visiting your Rebbe on Chol HaMoed. So the first of the two stories goes like this. There were two Chachamim, two young Chachamim, who went to visit Rabbi Yehoshua. And Rabbi Yehoshua said to them, "Tell me what's new in the Beit Midrash." And the two of them tried to avoid answering him. They said, "Talmidecha anu meimecha anu shotim." What could we possibly say to you? We are your students, we drink your water. And he insisted, no, there is no such thing as a Beit Midrash without chidush, without innovation. What did you do today? And they finally told him, and he embellished what they had said. The Gemara goes on to say, "V'lema le behedya." Why didn't they answer him directly? What's the big deal? They ended up telling him it was the Shabbat of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Here's what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah taught. Why didn't they tell him directly? So the Gemara says, well, it's because of the story of Rabbi Yossi ben Dur Maskit. What's the story? Rabbi Yossi ben Dur Maskit went to visit Rabbi Eliezer, presumably also on Chol HaMoed, and Rabbi Eliezer asked him, what's new in the Beit Midrash? And blissfully naive, he answered the question, and he told Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer became furious, and he said, Yossi, extend your hands and receive your eyes. In other words, he blinded his student. He was infuriated. And then a few moments later, he said, and go tell them, don't pay attention to your cheshbon, to your having debated the issue. I have a Kabbalah, I have a tradition from my Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who has a tradition from his Rebbe, who has a tradition from his Rebbe, all the way back to Sinai, that the same thing that you said. In other words, what you said was right, but your process was wrong. You should have relied on tradition. You should not have debated the issue. You shouldn't be questioning. You should be relying on tradition. My friends, I want to say that what's always guided me is my belief that Jewish life is a dialogue between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. That on the one hand, you have the innovators like Rabbi Yoshua, who say there's no such thing as a Beit Midrash without innovation. On the other side, you have Rabbi Eliezer, who says it's tradition, it's the Masorah. I don't want to hear anything that's new, that's fresh. And I think the capability to lead, the capability to innovate has to do with being able to build those bridges between the innovators and the traditionalists. And that's what I have tried to do. Now, I'm coming here as an outsider. I'm humbled by the achievements of the three women who are sitting here at this table. I'm a part of the Touro world. I can perhaps inspire a bit with my own experience, but I'm coming from Israel. I am not planted here in the United States. I'll tell you a little bit about my own path and where it has led me to, because I think this has to do very much with the way this was introduced as having a dream and feeling a sense of responsibility to go out and to actualize that dream. I know that a lot of us have one mitzvah or two mitzvot in life that we devote ourselves to. There are 613, but most of us have our passions in one area or another. So I have two. One of them is Talmud Torah, the other one is Taharat HaMishpacha. And for many years, I devoted myself as the wife of a rabbi to Taharat HaMishpacha. We lived in a small community in the north of Israel, not so small. We had 15,000 people, but it seemed to me the mikveh was being underutilized, and I worked for years, and eventually through education and also through changing conditions in the mikveh, I brought the use of the mikveh up from 6 women a night to 26 women a night. That was for me instructive because I was able to see that you see something going wrong, you get up and you say, someone's got to do something about this. At the same time, that was the beginning of an odyssey for me because I saw a great deal of suffering. I saw women who were not asking questions, who if only they had an address for asking questions, would be able to have their problems solved. Now, my husband is a posek, but at that time, if 3 or 4 questions would come in 2 months, we'd say, wow, that's a revolving door, because women weren't asking questions of a man in this area. And I know there are communities in which women ask, communities in which women don't ask, but I started out on this odyssey of seeing how there were women who were not conceiving, they were getting to the mikveh too late. There were women and men who were enduring prolonged and unnecessary marital separation. We are a religion that, including halachically, takes into consideration making people's lives good and pleasant. And I saw too much suffering. I'm not going to take you through my life, but along the way I realized that it was the merger of those 2 mitzvot that I'm devoted to that had an answer. And I said to myself, okay, just get up and do it. And we began about, let me see, our first graduating class was 1999 of Yoatzot Halakha. It was very important to me to build those bridges. Perhaps, I guess I'm an innovator, I have greatest respect for the traditionalists. Those bridges are very important. We did not go out waving banners. We did not say we're here to hang out a shingle. What we did was we enabled women to study Hilchot Nida. We added a unit for 2 years on women's health. We brought together an exceptional group of women imbued on the one hand with Yirat Shamayim, on the other hand with leadership abilities and excellence in learning. Since the time of their graduation, they have handled more than 250,000 halachic questions. The way this started was also serendipitous. The husband of one of the 2 graduates came to me a half year after the graduation and said, listen, we're getting a divorce. I'm getting a divorce. It's just a question, am I divorcing my wife or am I divorcing you? But I'm getting a divorce. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, listen, there's no day, there's no night in our home. Tova doesn't have any time with the children. Women are pounding down our door with questions. They're always calling right before Shkia, which is when the children need to eat, and the women are calling. And that was when we started our telephone hotline. So one thing leads to the next. But for me, it has not been a question of looking at the table and saying, I've got to get women at the table. It's looking at people's needs, looking especially at suffering, looking at the dignity of women's religious lives. You can say, and I did for decades I was out there telling women, you need to go to a Rav with questions. Did it help? I think it helped somewhat. But once we educated Yoatzot Halacha, we've been bringing babies into the world. We've caused couples not to have unnecessary marital separation. There's been so much pleasantness, and I think we've also created a role model for a path that can lead into leadership in step with rabbis. We had our first graduation of Yoatzot Halacha and a satellite program that Nishmat runs in the United States. Harriet Schimmel is sitting here. This wouldn't be without Harriet. In this program, when we had the graduation, there are between 40 and 50 RCA rabbis who signed on to our committee backing this graduation. So I believe that you can build those bridges. I think there needs to be a lot of humility in building the bridges, but an absolute conviction that what needs to be, needs to be. Now, I want to say one more thing, and I'll end with this, that when I look at my own trajectory, I say to myself, sometimes with a degree of pain at what my days are filled with, I know how I've made this happen. I know that there's a change in Jewish life that's underway and that I'm part of facilitating, which has to do with multi-year Torah learning for women. You wouldn't send a man to medical school for 10 years so that he can be a neurosurgeon, and a woman for 1 year, and then say, well, it's interesting, the women aren't coming out with the same skill set. I have been ready to devote myself to a nasty word in Jewish life, and I'd like to put that word out in front of you because I think this is a very important word for women to learn. The nasty word is fundraising. If you want to make something happen, you've got to find partners. And I think this is an area in which women have got to come into their own. I'm not proud of how much time I spend fundraising. I am proud of the individuals that I've been privileged to meet in the course of fundraising. I would much rather be sitting at my table in the Beit Midrash and trying to figure out why are all the Achronim supporting the Chatam Sofer when the No Yehuda is so much more logical. That's what I'd like to be doing. But if you don't get out there, if you're not willing to take the time to go out there and to explain to people, in order to make this happen, we need partners. We need to reorder our priorities. It's not going to happen. So I sometimes feel, I guess the way Henry Kissinger felt, he used to describe how he would be traveling eastward, look out the plane window, and he'd see himself traveling westward on the plane at the same time. I sometimes feel that way. But it's a nasty word because it hasn't been said publicly, and I think it needs to be said publicly, that when we see needs that need to be met, fundraising becomes a Kiddush Hashem, and it's something, it's something where I'm grateful for the opportunity to do so. I would love to sit with the Chatam Sofer and the No Yehuda a little bit more, but spend less time on the plane. But I never feel regret about a conversation I'm having. I do regret the time in plane travel, unless I'm seated next to the right person, in which case I'm very happy to spend the time in plane travel. But otherwise, the plane travel is a waste of time. The conversations with lay leaders, with philanthropists, with people who can make a difference are what builds Jewish life. Thank you.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes for questions and answers. So questions, let's start in the back because we always start in the front. Yes.
Thank you very much.
And just, if you don't mind standing up to be sure everyone can hear.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation from all of you. I'd like for each of you to discuss some of the needs for halachically appropriate and professionally meaningful roles for women in the synagogues.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Halachically meaningful and halachically appropriate and meaningful roles for women in the synagogue. The synagogue is the central institution in Jewish life. As such, it tends to be a treasured institution and a somewhat conservative institution. It's also a place where you have to hold the whole community together. I believe you can find those roles, and I believe that the pace of change needs to be such that on the one hand, we're not losing 50% of our population because the women are frustrated, they're in the back row, and on the other hand, the whole shul is comfortable. I was recently in a shul where the rabbi showed me with great pride the mechitza. The mechitza was gorgeous. It had Eshet Chayil on it. It was a magnificent mechitza, and the only problem was that the Eshet Chayil was facing the wrong direction. The women couldn't see it. I have yet to walk into one shul where you have Mashiv Haruach on a plate in the women's section. It's always in the men's section. Women don't have to say Mashiv HaRuach. I never see Modim D'Rabbanan in the women's section. I want to see shuls paying attention to women. You can't tell a woman that you can't tell a woman, don't bring children to shul. If you want the woman to come to shul, you've got to make sure you have appropriate child care in the shul. And from that time, women are going to come into the shul. I know I'm talking about things which we all agree about, but they're not being done in enough shuls, and they've got to be done. Now let's step forward. What about women's voices being heard in shul? We're within the framework of halacha. Within the framework of halacha, you're going to have a mechitza. It's there. It's since the days from the Gemara and Sukkah. It's since the days of the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. The mechitza is not going to be eliminated in Orthodox synagogues. It's there. As far as I'm concerned, I'm always offended when I have to look at the men I have to like a mechitza. I'm not there for a spectator sport. As far as I'm concerned, the action is vertical. The tefillot getting up to where they should go, and I'm not there to watch. But I wish to say there are places in the synagogue that you can have women taking a role. Is there anything against women making announcements? No. Is there anything against women giving divrei Torah? No. And I think the way to go is that within synagogue ritual, you are going to have your fixed Orthodox synagogue, but I think you've got to introduce new things. That's why Yoatzot Halacha worked. If we called them rabbis, it wouldn't have worked. They're Yoatzot Halacha, and this is not about language. This is about creating something new. Have women give shiurim within the synagogue, and it will make the service much more meaningful for everybody who's sitting in that synagogue. I think that each synagogue needs to decide for itself what exactly it's going to do in order to become more inclusive. I think the emphasis needs to be upon prayer, upon making prayer more meaningful, and including women in prayer. I have just one more thing to say, which is what we do at Nishmat. We have Kabbalat Shabbat of women, which means our students all together in the Beit Midrash. The men only come in for Baruch, and it's an extraordinary experience. We also have Slichot for women. It's extraordinary. There is so much female energy, which is wonderful, 100% within the framework of Halakha, something which is new, which hasn't been done, and which to my mind is empowering.
Okay, let's take another question. Yes.
There's one element in success for professional women that hasn't been discussed today, and that's having a supportive husband. It's absolutely critical.
Yeah.
And I think education
Excellent point.
of sons is just as important. I mean, I was in the middle of my surgical internship in the 60s, and every morning when I got home, I would say, I quit. And every night I would say, I quit, and every morning my husband pushed me out the door.
Good.
So I'm telling you that without that, it's impossible for professional women to really succeed.
That's excellent. Would either of you like to, do either of you want to comment on it, right?
We'll applaud her husband sitting next to her.
Right? Good.
I would just comment that the research in the early 70s, looking at increasing fathers' engagement in the home is illustrative. What they found was that as much as fathers would talk about wanting to become, the new age engaged dads, that when they walked in the door, if their engagement wasn't supported by the women would hold on to their roles, and there was no space for men to take over. I think that we need very supportive people in our lives. It's not just our husbands, by the way, it's our sons and daughters who need to support us. And I think that support is gender blind. You need it, whether you're male or female, you need it in today's hectic, very fast-paced world where we're all trying to keep, the Ed Sullivan Show, the plates, where you're trying to keep those plates spinning. We all need extra sets of hands if we're going to make it work, and we need a lot of support.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
A quick story on the evolution of the OU and It's 1985. I was just past president of Lincoln School Synagogue. I was asked to be chairman of the nominating committee. The person who chose happened to be a woman. I called the OU up and asked whether we could do this, and I was told, Melech Olomah. You could be a king, but not a queen. And that woman never became president, and she never served. I'm just delighted to see these four wonderful women, brilliant, articulate, talented, involved in Jewish affairs.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's do a question on this side. Yes.
Can you just address the reaction of females to women in leadership in their particular organization? I have found in my experience that women are just as have just a difficult time accepting other women in leadership positions.
Thank you. Okay, so the question is women's response to women in leadership. I'd like to get comments actually from all of our speakers on that. Dr. Novick, do you want to begin?
I hear you, and I think that there are those issues. It may be that being at Yeshiva University and being in a situation where there's more male leadership than female leadership, women are so happy to find compadres. We have the ladies who lunch together. We are each other's support network, and we're really thrilled to have other female leadership coming up through the ranks of our institution. That's not to say that the research does not, indicate that there are people out there, many, who still prefer working for a man and who experience discomfort at having female leadership.
I'm referring to lay people and point women. Women who are
I was going to see how long. I might even stop here. Let's see how long it takes.
So the perspective, again, often our perspectives come from our personal experiences. I've only observed, and potentially that's because the women who are involved, I've only observed an understanding and appreciation for women by women in my social services roles. I think professionally, I will acknowledge your point, all my mentors are male. I think from my perspective, it's a generational shift. Potentially, an earlier generation of women felt they had to make very difficult career choices with regard to being both mothers and professionals, and may feel a next generation who tries to balance both and become successful in both arenas, they may not necessarily have similar perspectives to share. I think, so I don't think I necessarily have perspectives on having seen that phenomenon you raise. I would offer the point that learning to deal with difficult people of whatever gender is an important skill set, and exactly the kind of skill set we could be equipping our girls and our boys in their high school and leadership opportunities and training to deal with.
I don't know if you want to add anything. Did you go ahead? And this is our last question, but we're going to go downstairs, continue the discussion, and our speakers will be there as well.
Shared by Newberger, and I served with Dr. Stoltz-Loike. I just want to point out one thing that people should not have the wrong impression, that of course when we did make this decision, because there was a lot of sentiment on the command sentiment on the committee that we wanted women officers, that it was done with consultation with our Rabbanit, with halachic consultation. It's not that the OU all of a sudden decided that was 1985, this is 2004, and I'm sure Fred would agree as well, that this was done because our Rabbanit said that we could do what we did, and they were encouraging.
And I think Manny's remark is a great closing statement here, because that's what the OU represents, and that's what we're trying to achieve today, is we are all sitting at the same table halachically. And as we look at the opportunities for women, we're saying this is important. And the question is, how do we make all of that work with who we are as people, as individuals, and as halachic Jews? And what's beautiful is that we have been able to make strides. We have been able to do all kinds of new things and create new opportunities for women within that framework. I'd like to thank all of our speakers. I think they've been wonderful. I'd like to thank you all for being here, and we're going to convene in Plaza 1 through 4 downstairs, so please join us.